So this is the video for our retrofit of our standard AMD cooler over to our new DeepCool CPU cooler. I'm going to show you guys a couple things in this video, but for starters, I am assuming you have a graphics card, and if you don't, that's fine. You just don't have anything you have to take out. But this one has a graphics card installed. It also has the Wi-Fi antenna installed, but those really aren't going to do much to me here. So I just wanted to preface that I'm starting there with the glass off. So I'm ready to get into the case. I also have the parts of the CPU cooler kit contents over here because I wanted to try to simplify them a little bit for everybody. First of all, you should see two pieces, right, that look like brackets, that have screws on them, that have a pretty big kink on the sides. That's for an Intel processor, so we're not going to use those for this build. You can keep those if you want to, but we won't use them here. The package of stuff that you get with the kit, most of everything that you have in it, we're going to use the thermal paste, right? I'll show you guys that in just a second. And one of the wires, a couple of brackets, but this kit has some of the contents that we'll use, not all of it. You also should have, right, the little bag of screws and standoffs that the company sent us to do our retrofit. Okay. Our fan, which we'll do last. And then the two tools you'll need will be our fine cutters. You need these fine-tipped cutters so we can actually reach in and cut a couple of the screws off. I know it sounds funny, but it's just part of the process. And then you'll also need a screwdriver to make everything happen. So I'm going to take a quick pause. I'm going to go ahead and take the Wi-Fi antenna off and the graphics card just to make my life a little easier. So now you guys can see I got the graphics card out, I got the Wi-Fi antennas out, and you can see the screws for my AMD cooler that we put in. You can go ahead and take those screws loose and pull your cooler out. I'm going to go ahead and take the screws loose, but I'm not going to show it on video. So my cooler seemed to come off fairly easy. But if you do have trouble with your cooler coming off and it wants to stick and stay on, I've found that you can kind of just wiggle it a little bit, right, back and forth, and try to pull on it at different angles. But try to be easy as you're trying to get it off, so that way you don't pull too much on the processor socket. But once you clean it off, just go ahead and take your processor cooler off, set it aside, and you can see the CPU actually still has a lot of thermal paste on there that we want to clean off. So if you're in class or if you come to my lab, I have pre-packaged wipes that Noxua makes. They're a little bit overkill, but basically they're full of alcohol and they're a nice clean wipe that has little lint, so you can easily clean your processor when it's in the socket just like that. So I'm going to go ahead and just clean my processor off. I don't need to pull it out of the socket. I don't need to take it out or anything like that. The stock cooler didn't leave that much on there, so it's really just a bit of residue. And you're just going to try to wipe it off, okay? I usually like to fold a towel over, try to get yourself a new surface. But, you know, just like you're cleaning the counter, you're just trying to get all the grease and stuff off the top of the processor. And once you get it off, it does have alcohol inside of it, okay? So you will have to give it a little bit for it to dry off. But now I can actually start showing you guys a bit of the assembly of the brackets. So the hardest part about this, most likely, for everyone is going to be these brackets themselves. So these brackets have screws on them with a little retention screw that's on the back. It's a little bitty nut that's put on there by pressure. So the easiest way that I've found to start this process is to push your screw on one of these brackets, right, over into one of the corners, and take your little side cutters and try to get it in on the retention nut. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to cut that thin piece of metal. I know it sounds a little counterintuitive, but we have to get that screw off. So once you cut it, it's going to have a hole. You really just need to bend and put a lot of pressure, right? You're really trying to work that screw around to get the retention nut to come loose. And once you do, it's going to fly off, right? But you have an open hole right here that you're going to be able to put your screw through, and this will be what's left over. Now this we don't need. You can go ahead and put this to the side. You can save it if you want to, but we're not going to need this part. So I'm going to go ahead and do that for this side as well. I'll show you guys one more time. I'm going to get it right in there on that little back side of the screw, right by where the threads are. Try to cut, and if you can twist, that helps a little bit as well, but then you really just, you got to wiggle it. Sometimes it takes a little bit of elbow grease. Once you get it loose, you end up with this bracket. Okay, so you need to do these with both brackets first, and that's the first step to our retrofit. So I'm going to go ahead and do that for the other bracket. Okay, so now that I have both brackets, I'm going to go ahead and put them onto my heatsink itself, right? Now this part is what's actually going to match up to my CPU. This is the heatsink part, but I don't take this sticker off until I'm ready to apply. It keeps it nice and clean until I'm ready to put it right onto the socket. Okay, so this is our RGB. It's just our red, green, blue LED array that's on top, but this is just a wire that we'll plug in later. Okay, so what we're really focused on is we're going to need to get screws, right, on our brackets onto our heatsink. And they need to align with the angles pointed in. Okay, once you do that, right, you'll see the holes. There's a little screw that's inside of this package, 2 of them, that will go in these screws. Once you mount the screws into this bracket, this is ready to go on with our retention nut. So I will put these together, and then I'll show you guys the next part of the build. All right, so now I've got the brackets on my heatsink, and I'm ready to mount onto my CPU. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put my spacers in place. You guys don't have to do this, but the accessory kit that we got, the retrofit kit, basically has 4 little spacers that you're going to put over the standoffs where we had our old fan mounted to. This will then go down on top of those, and we'll put new screws in those holes on the bracket. And that is it. All we have to do is that'll have it installed once we put enough tension on. The only thing we need to make sure before we put that on is we need to make sure to get thermal paste back on. Remember the thermal paste we cleaned off? We have to add more on. Now in the kit with the cooler, you have a small pouch that you can tear off of what they call thermal compound, but it's the same thing as thermal paste. And I usually tell people just do something about the size of a small pea in the middle of the CPU. That's kind of old school, but with the Ryzens and how square they are, it's not like an Intel where you have to really distribute to a certain area. And what I've seen is when we put them on, this small little size right in the middle smushes out, and it gets really good coverage. So I'm going to go ahead and show you guys. I'm going to mount my cooler in with the wire for my RGB, point it back this way. And that's because that's the side I'm going to put the fan on. That's just personal preference. You can do it the other way, but this is how I'm going to install. And once I get my CPU kind of set down on there, I like to wiggle it and smush it around just to make sure I get everything distributed really well for the thermal paste. And then all I have to do is line up my screws. I like to kind of drop them into place, at least 1 or 2. And you can see the hardest part here is going to be kind of working around getting your hand in the case and making sure you get the screws in the right place. It's going to take a little bit of wiggling, but this is why I recommend getting the screws in before you screw any of them down. It makes everything a lot easier. And when you screw these down, it's really not, you don't have to get it too terribly tight. I usually tell people go snug, and once you get it snug, you can tighten a little bit more, but as long as it is maintaining contact, that's the biggest point. Okay, so I got that heatsink screwed on, and I got everything just snug, and you can tell like there's not much wiggle that goes into that heatsink, so it's in good position. Now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put the fan on, but it's important to note, We have two different cables here. This one is an RGB, right, for the lights, and this one is actually for power for the fan. The RGB line has two different connectors. This is so we can take, right, the RGB from our cooler itself, and you can plug it in, right? Now they both will get power at this point. This can easily plug into one of the fan connectors. I'm going to run it onto the CPU fan. That is the silver or gray connector, I guess you would call it. That's at the top of the motherboard. Okay, so I'm going to get that installed. And then all I have to do is get the fan mounted here. Then I'll worry about my wires and what I do with them later. But first, I'm going to show you guys about this fan. It has screw holes to mount onto some things, but when you're mounting it onto one of these heat sinks, you can't really screw into the heat sink. So they give you, right, these teeny tiny little brackets. And these brackets attach to the screw holes on the back of the fan, okay, just like that. So when the fan gets met with the front of the cooler, that piece of wire provides tension onto the back of this lid. So what you do is you put it in the holes and then you pull it until it kind of clips in, and now you can see my fan is kind of held in on one side already. I do the same thing on the other side. All right. It's not easy, but you use the screw holes as the point to catch. And once you get the tabs in, it's just a matter of pulling it back, right, and getting it mounted back behind. Now, I didn't get that one all the way on there. I'm going to have to do a little bit of work to get it on, and you guys might have to as well. But once you get it on, I'll show you guys some wire management for that. Okay, now, kind of wrapping up, and this is really all about wire management more than anything. So I've got all these extra wires just kind of hanging out for my RGB that I don't have connected yet. And this connector won't go to our motherboard, but it does have an adapter in the bag. Okay, so the adapter in the bag plugs in to give power to our RGB. And you guys have two options for plugging this into the motherboard, but be careful. If you look on the connector, it says plus 12V for 12 volts. And then GRB. It has to be plugged in with the right polarity. But there's two plugs at the top of the board. They're hard to see, but in the very top right corner, there's one that says LED C2, and there's another one right next to it that says CPU LED. So that'd be where you plug this one in. And just make sure you have the 12 volt on the 12 volt pin, which should be all the way over onto the right. And the rest will be aligned. Okay, so once you plug those in, all you need to do is work on your cable management, and we're going to take these wires and basically try to get them through one of the side holes and onto the back, right, of our CPU. That's just going to hide our wires and make everything look better. So I'm going to do that real quick, and then I'm going to do a power up and let you guys see what you should see when you're all done. Okay, moment of truth. So I've got all my wires pushed back behind the case. I don't have it put back together yet, but that's okay. I want to make sure everything works. I got hooked up to a monitor. I got my Wi-Fi adapter back. I got my graphics card back in. So I am going to turn my power switch on and power on. Well, the fans are spinning, so that's good news. Oh, and there's the RGB. So it looks like our cooler switch over went pretty well. Now, I don't have any video output on my monitor yet. Oh, there it is. Okay, so really what you're looking for here is you want to make sure that your fan is moving. Okay, make sure it's powered. You want to make sure there's lights going on as well. You want to make sure your rear fan is still moving. You can check your front fan if you have one, but we shouldn't have messed with that at all. So I'm going to go ahead and just do a couple quick things here, and I'm going to check my temperatures in BIOS. Dad. Give me 1 second. Okay, so wrapping up, I've been letting this thing run for a little while, and my CPU temp is 29 degrees Celsius. It's not too bad. I haven't put much work on the system. I haven't tried to really benchmark it or anything, so I haven't tested for temperatures, but everything seems to be working well. So that concludes our video for installing, retrofitting to your new CPU cooler on the 2023 project. We'll see you guys later. Say bye.
Bye.